Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Henry Hartevelt, and I'd like to welcome you to our educational seminar, Straight Talk Media Perspectives on Global Business Travel, Past, Present, and Future. We've got plenty of seats for those of you who would like to join. Please come and take a seat. And this is going to be interactive. You can see that there's at least one microphone set up here for your questions. But this panel is very important for you guys because we've got three of the industry's top reporters. We have Melanie Lieberman from The Point Sky. We have Arthur Andrade from Panrotis in Brazil, and Matt Parsons from Skift. Matt is based in London, so he also brings the European perspective. My name, again, is Henry Hartevelt, and I'm President and Travel Industry Analyst at Atmosphere Research Group. We're an industry strategic marketing research and advisory company, and the reason GBTA has asked me to moderate this panel is because in many cases, the reporters call me to get perspective as the analyst for the news. And now it's not quite turning of the tables, but it's my opportunity to ask this group questions. And it will be your opportunity to ask questions as well in a few moments. So again, we're going to be interactive. We hope it will be engaging. And most important, we hope it will be useful for you, that you will get to understand some of the trends, some of the thoughts that these reporters have. So, welcome. Thanks for joining us. My first question is simply, what's your reaction to GBTA? Granted, we are only part of the way through day one, but based on what you have seen and heard thus far, whether it's formal presentations, sidebar conversations, hallway conversations, what's your takeaway? All right. Yeah. This is always the fun part. Who wants to go first? These are like all the issues we had in school, remember? I don't want to go first. Go ahead.
No.
Is mine working? Yes.
Yeah, so we'll go first, yeah.
I'll jump in. Okay. No one's got a clue, have they? That's my initial reaction. I think there's so many mixed opinions. Is there a recession coming? No, it's fine. We're just looking in the short term. Sales are great. Everyone's here. Everyone's happy. Everyone's talking for the first time in years. And then we've got the GBTA Outlook, which came out just now, and
Smiker's live.
2026, things will be back to normal. So it's just such a mixed bag, really. And I think we're all guessing and, mixed bag.
Okay, mixed bag. Want to just share it with Melanie until we get her mic back?
Thank you. I would definitely echo that as well. It's sort of a really mixed optimism, although I would just say in general, the enthusiasm and joy to have everybody back in person, I think that's a pretty shared sentiment. So it's great to see everybody happy about being back. But in terms of the travel outlook, I think it's that same sort of murky crystal ball we've all been looking into for the last 2.5 years, where depending on who I've spoken to, really, really different feelings about how quickly we're going to be doing any sort of air quotes around the word normal.
Okay, all right. Arthur.
I agree some mixed feelings about what's going to happen, especially I saw a session for travel managers, so many questions, few answers, and I was very impressed with the future of work speech this morning, but I saw after that many, especially from the supplier's point perspective, in denial. I think, this is not going to happen. Maybe in Brazil it's different. These trends are not like that. And the travel manager with so many questions that maybe at the end of the event we have some answers.
So what are they denying?
For example, it's incredible. We have to convince people about ESG, about diversity, about the programs of inclusion. That's going to be important not only for society, but also for their companies. And they think it's, especially in Brazil, they think it's something from the left parties, it's something political, and it's not. They are in denial about that. It's one of the points.
Really? Okay. Matt, do you?
Yeah, I guess I think the airlines are particularly bullish because there's been all that pent-up demand. But one area we're looking at is how long will that demand last for? Everyone's had these meetings for the first time in 2.5 years. They've had the off-sites, the retreats. Great, but maybe that's going to tail off quite a lot.
Right. And in fact, I just had a sidebar where an airline representative said they're wondering, from their standpoint, will the momentum continue when the fall in the Northern Hemisphere hits after the U.S. Labor Day holiday, after mid-September? Will demand start to slack off? Will there be the return of business travel at the levels that we normally see? So let me ask you another question then. What are some of the hot topics that you are hearing discussed, that you are covering? For example, Artur, you talked about sustainability and ESG. You talked about diversity, equity, equality, inclusion. You mentioned a few things, but I'm just curious, what are some of the hot topics that you all are covering in your reporting, not necessarily, of course, related just to the conference, but as relates to business travel, even if it's an indirect relation? So, Artur, okay, Matt, go ahead. If you
I was going to say, from my perspective, I wouldn't imagine to be writing so much about digital nomads and digital nomad visas. I mean, that was not on my radar particularly 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. But obviously, when that became a more of a mainstream thing, it really took over. I write a briefing every Friday just on the future of work and how that kind of intersects with corporate travel. And to me, that's been, there's so much going on in that space, this flow of people, which just wasn't there before, because of, remote working, etc. So I think that's a really interesting area that I haven't heard too much of so far here, but I think that's one to watch.
Right, so future of work. Artur, you mentioned
Yes.
future of work. And I'm just curious, show of hands, are any of you having to deal with digital nomads in your organizations? How's it going? Is it difficult? Is it easier than expected? Do you wish they would all just come back to the office and behave? The C-suite wants people back in the office.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm trying to be a digital nomad. I used to work in São Paulo. That is the biggest city in Brazil, but I was born in Rio and my family is in Rio, so I came back to Rio. I'm trying to be between the two cities, but São Paulo is dragging me back. Everybody wants me in São Paulo, but I want to show them I can work from anywhere.
Right. So future of work is certainly a topic. What else is a hot topic?
In Brazil, we talked about that when we had the call for this meeting. The economic issues are very important. We see the airlines in Brazil already cutting capacity again because they cannot cover the cost, because demand is going down because of the so higher rates. So they're feeling that already.
Right.
So the economic impact of inflation and all these problems. We don't have the pilot shortage that you have here and in Europe, but we have the problem of working in TMCs, in hotels. But the economic side of it, it's more important for me now.
So are there issues in Brazil with labor shortages at hotels or TMCs? Are they having trouble?
Yes. And
what about corporate travel departments? Are they able to hire people?
No, so you have so many people like switching from one company to another, and people offering more money so they can change. It's a big issue in Brazil now. And in hotels, it's like here. In my hotel, I can only have lunch from 11 to 1 p.m. I tried to have lunch at 2 p.m. There's nothing open in the hotel. So we don't have this kind of problem in Brazil so big that you don't have the employee to serve, but people, the service is very slow and the quality is poor.
Okay, all right. Melanie, what are some of the hot topics you're covering?
Yeah, so I think, of course, the staffing shortages plaguing the industry, that is incredibly relevant to all of our readers, regardless of why they come to us. I'd be remiss not to mention the changing loyalty space. I am from the Points Guy after all, so that is something that we are constantly covering. But they just also, to the point about remote work and the digital nomad, one thing that I think is really fascinating that I think we will all be talking about more is that line between who is a business traveler and who is a leisure traveler has really started to evaporate to the point where I think a lot of the conversations we've been having in these main stages and these side sessions and the sidebars could really apply to almost any traveler from the individual perspective. So those are conversations that we're having as well from all sides of the topic.
Matt, did you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think the labour, the crunch, the crisis, whatever you want to call it, is pretty acute. I mean, in the UK especially, we had Brexit, so a lot of people that kicked in January. So a lot of people just left, went back to Europe. So there's a shortage of kind of those Europeans who filled a lot of roles in airports, for example. Over the last few years, inflation is just, again in the UK, I think it's going to be quite an issue. Energy prices up quite a lot, maybe less so in Europe. But I think just how companies are going to manage their kind of operational costs is going to be tricky, and then they're going to pass those costs on to the customers. So that's going to be definitely one to watch.
So again, bringing it back to what you've talked about and some of the research that we've done, we're definitely seeing, Melanie, to your point about loyalty, that the service cutbacks, the staffing shortages, the cutbacks in amenities are affecting the already thin levels of loyalty that exist. And so for those of you who are travel managers here, that could impact your ability to meet your business goals, your revenue commitment goals, market share goals, or anything else like that. As well as your travelers coming back and saying, we're paying this money and we're not getting the service or the experience that we're supposed to be getting for the money we're paying. So this is something that I think that needs to be paid attention to in the corporate travel world, because it could be a much larger problem. Now, Matt, I also want to follow on to something that you were talking about this, and Melanie, about the blended travel. So the digital nomads. The folks who are traveling for a combination of business and leisure in the same trip. Are you seeing this led by the business side or the leisure side? Where, again, trying to think about how does this affect the folks at this convention? What are the implications in your mind for corporate travel with this? Do we have to rethink what some of our travel policies are?
I think so. I mean, that little box that pops up, can any of this trip be considered personal? I think that whole way of thinking about how people are booking travel for work is starting to really change at a scale that we aren't necessarily prepared for. The types of accommodations that travelers are expecting to book, the way that they want to fly, the way that we're booking travel too. I mean, that is one-ways combined with train tickets, like that type of behavior, I think, is going to become increasingly in demand and necessary as people blend their leisure trips with their business trips. And one thing that we've talked about a little bit here, but are also constantly talking about, is the trend toward longer trips, right? People just tacking on a variety of things. I think that's true for business-specific and exclusive trips, and also for leisure trips. So everything, does it suddenly make sense to book an Airbnb? I don't think that most business travelers would have necessarily gone that way prior to the pandemic, but I can see that being a much more in-demand type of accommodation now.
I think there's it's still fairly new, isn't it? It's only just recently we can actually travel, en masse. So I think there's going to be a lot of challenges capturing the data of who's a business traveller, who's a leisure traveller, and it's just not, if I was a startup, this would be a great opportunity to create a company that could, track that data, get people to be a bit more transparent about what they're doing, convince companies to not just allow it, but just be more open about it, and just try and get a handle on the numbers, because I think then you'll have a better picture of where this is going.
You mentioned the vacation loyalty or the vacation home rental companies like Airbnb. Only a small number of corporations allow their employees to even stay at these kinds of places. Is the tail going to start wagging the dog here from your perspective? Is the blended type of trip or the digital nomad going to force corporate travel departments to be more open-minded to vacation home rental usage?
Even to the point that you made about how the amenities we've all come to expect from a compliant business hotel. Like those aren't there necessarily just because you are booking a hotel that prior to the pandemic had the club level lounge, the reliable services that you need to deliver for business travelers. They're not necessarily there, or their hours are from like noon to 2. So these are things that travelers and travel managers and all of us need to be thinking about, because sometimes an Airbnb may be the better solution. It may have the amenities that they need to make it not only more affordable at a time when prices are so outrageous across the board, but also because, the business traveler might demand it, especially if it's a long trip with a couple leisure trips
Right.
sprinkled in.
As Archer said, his hotel serves lunch only from 11 to 1. So if you want to eat at 1:30, too bad.
And no room service, too.
No room service. So
Because of the pandemic.
So, if you're from a hotel company and you wonder why your guests are giving you low customer satisfaction ratings, here you go. If you're from a corporate travel department and you're one of the many that are doing traveler surveys post-trip and you're seeing stuff go down, here you go. This is not frivolous. If your employees don't feel that they can get something to eat when they need to or can't get room service so that they can be productive, what does that mean? How does this fall into the duty of care responsibilities that we have? So, there's a microphone here, so.
For some of the larger programs, the security element is impacting that ability for the traveler to say, I want to be at an Airbnb, because the duty of care has become such a serious issue, certainly from a hotel perspective, that they really need to make sure their travelers are being looked after, they're staying in safe neighborhoods, and there's automation available to help score that during the procurement process. So these things are a factor, I think, maybe for the more larger established multinational programs where you might have a startup scenario, I think is more likely to do the Airbnb.
So let me ask, because Michael brings up a really good point. Are you all writing more about traveler security and traveler risk? That, not just a nod, but furrowed brow from Melanie and aggressive.
Not the one reporting on that, just to be clear. Like, I
Try
can
not to.
explain how the VPN works, but I know it's important, so.
Matt.
I mean, duty of care is, that's been around for a long time.
Right.
And as SCIF's policies, we don't even, we try not to use that expression because it's just obviously safety, it's security, it's a given really. So I think the issue now is, is it travel, is it human resources, is it tax, is it security or duty of care? Nobody really knows at the moment, so that's why it's very much up in the air. But I think security it's a given, isn't it?
Right. Arthur?
I would say that international business travel in Brazil hasn't come back yet as domestic, partly because of that. Because people don't have answers or policies for that. And the suppliers too, adding about the other question, they don't know how to deal with this new traveler. For an airline, either you are leisure or corporate, and that's it. They don't identify your new needs, and the hotels too. Hotels in Brazil, like they put 5 rooms with length stay and a microwave oven, and that's it. But they don't identify the other needs, the end-to-end journey. And so these are questions that we together have to build and to have a better future on that.
I would say they are changing. There are some travel agencies and even airlines which are kind of baking in this facility to book, not just your business trip, but you can say, yes, this is a leisure trip, and also you can bring your partner, your children, etc. So they're kind of, I think once more companies do that and factor it in from a tech standpoint, then you'll find out who's going where and doing what.
Okay. So next question, I'm curious, are there topics that you are still reporting on that as you're writing your articles, you are sitting there going, I cannot believe we are still discussing this? What are those?
As I mentioned earlier, the diversity issues. I have to convince people that they have to promote diversity and inclusion. But talking about the technical parts of the business travel in Brazil, some process as old as travel. Like in Brazil, some companies, they don't want to use the credit card, the business credit card, for example. It's a big issue in Brazil. Hotels in Brazil are independent, so 85% independent hotels. So the payment issues are very, very big in Brazil. So there are companies that they want to pay for the TMC like 4 months later. So it's like, with inflation, that's unbelievable. So we are still discussing these processing things, payment things. For me, it's amazing. It's counterproductive.
I will make this relevant, I promise, but one of the stories that we all laugh every week, we can't stop updating, we can't get away from, is our country-by-country reopening guide that chronicles pretty much every country and what you need to get in, vaccination, proof, COVID tests, etc. No requirements, but now there are some. But I think that uncertainty, the fact that this story is still something our readers are searching for, is actually something we haven't talked about as much here today as I thought we would. But we all know that has been a huge barrier to the return of business travel. And that ongoing uncertainty, I think, is actually really well reflected in our readers, who you still don't really know exactly what you need to do to get into a country. And that very basic level that we're still there is shocking to me, but I think also says a lot about where the whole industry is at right now.
Melanie, do you hear, or Artur or Matt, do you hear from travelers? Do they write to you and say, I'm not ready to travel for business yet, and here's why? What kind of emails are you getting or conversations are you having around that, if any?
Even obviously when the U.S. Got rid of its inbound COVID test requirement for flyers, that was huge for leisure travel and business travel, but it didn't do away with the fact that you can still test positive for COVID and it can upend your trip, business, leisure, it doesn't matter. And I still hear from people all the time that they're so reticent to book a trip when you just don't know. So that's something I think that I know we've come so far, and there's so much optimism and there's so much pent up demand, and that's really exciting. But I think the reality is, for a lot of people, individuals, businesses, it's frightening to put a lot of money on the line for your team we just put a big team gathering together, and that was very concerning because so many people expressed to us at an individual level that they weren't comfortable going.
Yeah, especially international travel. You don't want to get stuck in a country for 2 weeks in isolation and the company paying for everything and you away from your family, away from your country. That's why international travel haven't come back yet.
I'd agree, and I think there's still elements of caution out there, especially from the bigger companies. It's just not worth the risk, is it, to send someone to a country. Smaller companies, obviously, you hear about this. They're fueling the recovery. These, the small and medium-sized enterprises. But there is caution, yeah.
How big of a focus is sustainability as it relates to business travel in your reporting? It's obviously a big part of the GBTA conference. How big is it? Artur, again, you mentioned that there's some questioning about it in Brazil, driven by politics. But where does that stand in terms of the importance of the topics you're focusing on, or the priority you're giving it in your reporting?
For me, it's a very big issue. We talk a lot about that. We organize an annual event and we have some sessions about it. But still, I think it's something that we have to talk a lot and frequently, because for many people, it doesn't ring. How will I make money with that? Which business it's driving to my company? They don't see it. I don't know why, but they don't see it.
Yeah, from a business travel perspective, it's gift. It's when we talk a lot about the corporations. Obviously, it's number one on their agenda. But then when it comes to actually whether people are prepared to pay extra, not many people, I think, are willing to do that. I'm not sure the companies are factoring that into their budgets. allowing huge increases so that they can pay for more sustainable aviation fuel. And I'm not sure that's happening at the moment. And there's polls that kind of say that as well. So it's I'm not saying it's greenwashing. It's obviously top of the agenda and it has to be, but whether or not it's people are actually investing in those initiatives remains to be seen.
That was something one of the TMCs I talked here from Brazil. He was telling me, we don't have many electric cars in Brazil, so my client will not pay more to rent an electric car. So this is the speech thing now, not a reality in Brazil. In Europe, okay, you have so many fleets of electric cars, but not in Brazil. He thinks his client would not pay more for that.
It's interesting. That's interesting. So, we haven't talked about the technology side of all of this, but it's central to how this industry functions. I'm just curious, are there any technology-based developments that you are covering that you find particularly interesting or innovative or even disruptive?
Yeah, I think business travel is, very, affiliation with technology, and it always has been. One area which surprised me really was the lack of kind of talk about, virtual reality, the headsets and the Oculus headsets and how that could really impact business travel in the future. I mean, we picked up on a new story last year, and Accenture, the consulting company, they bought 60,000 VR headsets for their intake of interns for that year. And for me, that's incredible because you've got this new generation of employee who is going to be growing up almost in this corporate world in VR, having internal meetings with clients. And, obviously these consulting companies, they do a lot of travel, they're big spenders. So I'm just wondering how that's going to filter, in the years to come, how that's going to filter into their spending patterns. But then also, what are the travel agencies doing to kind of meet them halfway? I know companies like Amadeus, they invest in kind of VR technology, but it's just, I think that's like a bit of an area to watch, actually, the virtual reality side. The same way that Zoom's just impacted a lot of things. So,
Arthur?
I'd say in terms of technology, our focus has really been more on the individual business traveler and whether or not it is viable for them. I mean, going back to the work remote conversation, there are some very basic amenities that travelers need to work remote. Those have been the areas of focus for us, along with mobile key security and that type of thing. But I think that's very much across the board, regardless of leisure or business travel.
Yeah, we write a lot about technology in Brazil and again, the payment solutions that are appearing, but we have so many solutions in general that maybe the travel managers and the TMCs are kind of confusing in which direction should I go. I write a lot about NDC too, and we try to keep up and to give the information for our readers, but it's kind of confusing for them.
I want to just say, falling back to something Matt said, I think my perspective as the analyst who looks at the intersection of commerce and technology, I think VR is going to be one of the most disruptive technologies that we will have seen in recent times, and I think we are all very ill-prepared to manage this. Mm-hmm. I think that VR is going to have a substantial impact on business travel by reducing the need for business travel by a magnitude no one in this room is considering. So that is going to be something I think that is going to be far, far, far more profound. The fact that Meta, the new corporate parent name for Facebook, is not here, to me is shocking. I wouldn't be surprised if they had a big fancy display at some point next year or in 2024.
And also I think Apple have got, their headset coming out
absolutely
quite soon. I think, the iPhone, what did the iPhone do to the world? That's one to watch as well, I think.
So I want to open it up to you all for your questions. So if you've got a question, because now we have a band playing just to make things easier.
Where is this band from?
So please raise your hand so we can come to you with the microphone. We are not going to ask anyone to dance. We did that at lunch. Maybe it will happen tonight later. But please raise your hand if you have a question. And the floor belongs to you all now.
It's more of a comment than a question, but it's interesting you said Meta being here, potentially in the future, and, their acceptance in the GBTA, community, because imagine that's all virtual. Our whole job here as exhibitors and buyers is to bring people together physically, and to have that sort of company with their technology here would be mind-blowing to a lot of people, I think.
Well, there are already companies that are developing virtual reality spaces. I mean, anyone remember Second City, when that was around in the early 2000s? But there are companies, leisure companies, some hotel brands and others that are starting to develop their presence in virtual reality worlds. Not saying it's going to be, one of Meta's or one of the other many ones that are developing. Melanie, sorry.
I was going to say, watching the, acquisition of real estate space in the metaverse is something I think all of us, I'm really personally reticent to, I'm uncomfortable with it on a personal level, and that's fine. But I think despite our discomfort, perhaps collectively, with that whole concept, it's something that's happening in the background. And I think to your point, we can't not address how it's going to affect future GBTA conferences and the nature of what we all do.
And I think, if Meta were to be here, that would be, incredible. And I think in the same way, you've got Amadeus working with Microsoft, and they're kind of plugging in these travel tools into, I think via Citric, but they're plugging into, Microsoft Teams. So, you can either book a flight via your Outlook calendar or just do a Teams call. But then in the future, it's going to be, linked up to the Xbox technology with their headsets. So it's kind of, if you were a tech provider and you had that kind of, if you could offer VR or the, really nice booking experience to take a real, a flight to actually have a real meeting, wouldn't you get more kind of customers by offering those choices rather than just, kind of putting your head in the sand?
Very good point. Questions? So, yeah, go ahead.
I'll go ahead with one other one. This falls under the topic of things we've talked about for years, and you can't believe you're writing about it again. I think in the face of the numbers we saw from the Carlson projection, with 18% increases on hotels and really just ridiculous double-digit numbers, do you think we're finally going to see corporations marry their transient travel spend with their groups and meetings travel spend to try and leverage better deals with suppliers? It seems like such an obvious procurement tactic, but we all know, we've been talking about it for 20 years. Do you think this environment might, and the advancements of technology might make it happen? What are you guys hearing from your sources about that?
I think, this is a highly, as you know, a highly fragmented industry, and I think that's probably some way off. And, a very kind of protectionist nature of travel suppliers, talking to each other, look at the airline kind of, the PNRs and the way they hold the data. So it's probably, we'll be talking about it for a lot longer.
Inside the corporations.
Well, you hear more of these, the travel buyers moving into, taking on the meetings procurement, don't you? I mean, I think that some companies are doing that, but it's perhaps some way off.
Mel, I'm sorry, no, okay. So are there any other things coming down the pike as you're talking to folks that you think are going to be disruptive as it relates to corporate travel, whether it is directly in the corporate travel space or something like virtual reality, which is not directly in corporate travel, but could have the unintended consequence of being disruptive to this sector of the industry?
I'm curious about loyalty to see which is Melanie's vision on that. How is loyalty changing?
The future of loyalty?
Yeah. What do you think, Melanie?
I mean, I think even what we've watched over the course of the pandemic, the way in which the demand for loyalty is really quite high, but that it can't be met the same way as it was prior to the pandemic. I think we all know that loyalty programs have evolved in such a way that we don't necessarily have we certainly don't have the same model for acquiring loyalty, for earning loyalty. And I think we need to see a lot more creativity from the loyalty space. We saw some interesting incentives happen throughout the pandemic, ways to help travelers maintain and reach loyalty that didn't involve button seat miles and the same amount of spend directly with an airline or hotel. But I've been really excited by the ways in which loyalty programs have been thinking about rewarding people for dining purchases and retail shopping and just trying to meet travelers where they are. Because, again, we have so many people who are not going to identify as the traditional road warrior necessarily, the way that we knew it before. And with prices being what they are, it's really hard for travelers to get that top tier level of loyalty no matter how much they travel. So I just think we're going to see a lot more innovation in that space, or I certainly hope so. Otherwise, I think we all know what's going to happen. People are not necessarily giving their loyalty the way they used to.
Yeah, I think, the loyalty space is just, absolutely fascinating. And we, at Skift, we love a kind of a good subscription story. So I think the subscription model is really interesting, and there's more kind of, traditional travel companies moving into those business models. And I think the ones that do that earlier than later will really benefit.
Yeah, I mean, Accor did something during the pandemic. You could get a subscription to hotel rooms. Some budget airlines have a subscription product that you can buy that gets you access to discount fares. United Airlines has a series of subscription products that you can purchase that give you access to their Economy Plus seats or checked bags or things like that. I agree. I think that the subscription model is really interesting. But does that work with corporate travel?
Well,
how does corporate travel work with that? Where, are there benefits? How do you identify which of your travelers might actually make sense to take a subscription out?
Yeah, I mean, it ties, in my opinion, into the kind of digital nomad. So these people have got the freedom to kind of roam if the policy lets them. They can go to different countries. They can check in different hotels. They've got some loyalty there. But that's what the subscription model could open up. And I think both sides would gain from that.
So one thing related to sustainability, Microsoft has imposed the essential equivalent of what you would call a travel tax on its employees. That when they take a business trip, there is an internal financial tax applied towards that goes to pay towards Microsoft's sustainability efforts to offset the environmental impact of that trip. Do you believe that this is something that we're going to see more companies practice in the future?
I believe so. As I said in the beginning, some things have to be mandatory. You have to push it so it can evolve. So.
Yeah, no, I think I remember covering kind of the carbon budget concepts.
Right, that's it, the carbon budget, carbon tax.
4 or 5 years ago, I think WWF, so the World Wildlife Foundation, were kind of pioneering that, and it's good to see Microsoft doing that, and I think that's a really interesting model. And if a company is genuine about cutting carbon, then they will adopt that kind of business model. But again, it's from a procurement perspective, it's probably very, very complicated to do.
I've heard it here a little bit, but this idea of it really being on the corporation to make it mandatory or to incentivize their travelers to change their behavior. I think we all know that paralysis of I can't save the planet myself, so why try? But I think that's where it really is the corporation's responsibility to change their team's behavior.
Money talks, isn't it? That's the best way to drive any behavioral change, and so just carbon tax, definitely.
We have time for one more audience question. Does anyone have a question? Y'all are too shy, or you don't want to compete with the band? Does someone have a hand up? Okay. So one last, let's just fast forward and imagine we're here a year from now. What do you think the most interesting thing will be in business travel during the course of the next year that will happen? You think you'll be reporting on?
I'll go with the digital nomads, this freedom to work from anywhere and to be more flexible in work.
Okay. Melanie.
Yeah, I like the word flexibility. I think the idea that travelers could potentially, possibly be staying in vacation rental properties or using subscription services to book their own travel, I think that these are all things we could be talking about next year.
Yeah, I think remote working, work from anywhere, etc. That's just going to become a huge trend over the next year, I think.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our panel, Artur, Melanie, and Matt, for their great insights. I hope this has been useful for you. Thank you for attending, and enjoy the rest of GBA 2022 convention.
Thank you.